Welcome to an overview of government contracting set-asides, brought to you by the Startup King Small Business Lectures. If you're interested in following the government contracting series set-asides, please subscribe to our channel. There are 5 videos, the first one being the overview of government set-asides, which you're watching right now. The second one, separating local state contracting set-asides. Number 3, federal contracting set-asides, and number 4 and 5, concentrating on 2 specific federal certifications, which are a little bit more in depth and require extra time. Number 4 will be the federal 8A certification, and number 5 will be the federal HUBZone certification. If you subscribe, you'll also be notified of when we upload other videos, including basic government contracting tips and how to start working with the government. So what are set-asides? The basics are as follows. These set-asides are set by city, county, state, and federal agencies. They are designed to provide opportunity to the socially, economically, and geographically disadvantaged. Now, these are people who are either considered socially, economically, or geographically disadvantaged. And as we move forward throughout this lecture, you'll understand a little bit more of what the government considers disadvantaged and what they consider to be socially, economically, or geographically. And the very basic of set-asides are that the government sets out a percentage of government contracts and allocates them to qualified and certified business. So if you are a qualified business that is women-owned, you may be eligible for certain set-asides. These are not just for those classified as minorities. So that is a big myth, and we'll discuss that and how those apply. They also provide an advantage to the little guy or little gal. These are basically, that's the basic intent of the entire government contracting set-aside program. They exist for all types of projects needed by the government. I just decided to pick the letter C and list out some services and products that the government buys from businesses, from small businesses in particular: construction, cybersecurity, cars, you name it. These set-asides will cover and apply. Set-asides are based on size, location, gender, and race. So breaking those down, size-based. There is actually a category for really small companies, really small businesses. And we'll talk more about that, but some jurisdictions, some government agencies call them micro businesses. There are small businesses, and the SBA, which we'll talk about in the next slide, determines what is small. And then, of course, there are large businesses. And although they do not get set-asides directly, they may be awarded contracts with set-aside requirements for subcontractors. So a large company will have to go out and pursue small businesses to fulfill, let's just say, 10% of a small business goal for that contract, or 5% women-owned business for that contract. They're also location-based. These are the geographic-based set-asides. Many jurisdictions, not the federal government, but others, have local business set-asides. So if you are a city-owned business, if the person who owns the company lives within the city, you get extra points, you get extra set-asides. And then speaking on the federal level, headquarters and employees that are located in economically disadvantaged zones, and we'll talk about this, what I mean is hub zones. If those people if those companies are headquartered in certain zones and their employees, a certain percentage of them live in those zones, that is a benefit to that economically disadvantaged zone, so you can take advantage of a specific government set-asides. And of course, the most popular one that most people know are the gender and race-based set-asides for qualified businesses. We have the women-owned business, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native-owned businesses as well. The size-based set-asides. As I briefly mentioned, there are micro small businesses. The state of Virginia, for example, I believe $1 million limit. If your annual revenue is less than $1 million, you can be considered a micro business. And that provides you extra set-asides outside of just a small business set-aside. Again, size-based ones, small business enterprises, small businesses reserve programs. And what's really important to understand is that the size requirements, the size eligibility is determined by the Small Business Administration, most often called the SBA. And these determinations are based on many factors, such as industry, competition, firm size, growth trends, historic activity, the market share, and so on and so on and so forth. There are quite a few factors that they determine, and they are revised on an annual basis, taking a look at those trends and historical activities. Then there are location-based set-asides. The location-based set-asides include local business enterprises, resident-owned business enterprises, long-time resident business enterprises, local manufacturing business enterprises, development enterprise zone, HUBZone, opportunity zone, and the list can actually go on because certain jurisdictions have their own qualifications and their own categories. But just to give you a quick example of a resident-owned business, Washington, D.C. is a good example of this. Their jurisdiction does provide set-asides for contracts if you are a resident-owned business. So not only is your company based in Washington, D.C., but you are also living in Washington, D.C. They like to give extra points for that. They want to provide contracts to people living in that jurisdiction. Then there's a long-time resident business, which of course, you know, you're a resident-owned business, but you have been there for 10 years, 20 years, depending on the jurisdiction's requirements. And of course, the gender or race-based, these are socially targeted for socially disadvantaged populations. Basically those who have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias. Typically women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, which include Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American, and the big federal program for socially disadvantaged populations is the 8A program. The question is, why should you pursue certification? The first thing to know is there really are set-asides by the government, and we'll discuss the numbers. So the federal government does have a goal to award a minimum amount to qualified small businesses. For example, let's say you're a service-disabled veteran and small business. 3% is the goal of the overall federal government to provide 3% of contracts, set aside for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. Same thing, 3% for HUBZone businesses, 5% for small disadvantaged businesses, which 8A is included in that, and then 5% for women-owned businesses. These are prime contracts and subcontracts, so you don't have to just be a prime. And what's important to know is that different agencies on the federal level, along with local and state governments, have their own set of minimum goals. So the Department of Veterans Affairs actually has a significantly higher service-disabled veteran-owned set-aside goal. It does give you a competitive edge if you are certified. So if you are qualified as a business, and by a qualified business, we mean that you actually have the capabilities and the past performance to perform the work. You cannot just start a company, have no past performance, have the owner not know anything about the business, let's say computer software design, and be considered qualified. You cannot just step in there just because you meet one of the criteria and be eligible for a set-aside. You're not going to get government awards that way. So the second thing is if you are eligible for a set-aside, and of course, we'll discuss specifics on the eligibility criteria. But if you meet those, if you're a qualified business and you're eligible for set aside, then you are missing out on opportunities. Certification to qualify for set asides does provide you a competitive advantage. And remember, just because you have a set aside certification does not mean the contracts will roll in automatically. Once you get certified, this traditional way of getting business, engaging, understanding agencies, understanding problems, and marketing your services still does apply. You just have an extra advantage over other companies that do not have set-aside certification. The next steps. Let's say that you think you're qualified. If you have an existing business or thinking about starting a business, here are some basic requirements that you should keep on the top of your head right off the bat. 51%, of the business must be owned by a socially or economically disadvantaged individual. And that's basic. The majority of the business has to be owned by that socially or economically disadvantaged individuals. The next thing you want to do is check if your business is considered small by the SBA. Now, if you're watching this lecture, and if you're following us on YouTube, chances are you are a very small business. So you're very likely under the minimum threshold of what the SBA considers a small business. But the URL is right there, sba.gov/size-standards. And you'll just be asked a certain, I think 3 or 4 questions on what your company does. The number that you see on the top left-hand corner of the box, 541511, that's called the NAICS code, which we'll cover in another one of our webinars. But that NAICS code corresponds to custom computer programming services. Now, the SBA considers a company making less than $30 million on a 3-year average to be a small company, to be a small business or a small firm. So chances are, if you're listening to this webcast, then you're more than likely not making over $30 million. But there are other NAICS codes that have 15 million, 8 million thresholds, but again, chances are you are qualified based on the size. The next thing you want to do is make sure you're not already rich. So by economically disadvantaged, one of the things that the government considers is that the owner of the company is not already affluent. And they define those criteria by the individual's net worth. So it can't be more than $750,000. The average personal income of the owner cannot be more than $350,000. And the fair market value of all the assets that the owner owns cannot exceed $6 million. So you get certified at the local, state, federal, or sometimes even agency level. You have to check with your city, your county, your state, and the different federal agencies that you're looking to do business with. And that's very important, not just to develop the relationship, but understand their requirements. Generally speaking, small business standards are set by the SBA. So if you take that to your local or state agencies, they will likely honor those. If you're qualified, if you met all the above that we've discussed, then you're likely going to want to start the application process. The application process can be a little bit daunting if you haven't done it before, so you can ask us for help, or you can find someone else to help you, someone else who's done it before, perhaps. If you're also interested, you can sign up for the Startup Ascent course. This is based on the Startup King book, and the book is actually used as course text. And government certifications are discussed in there, how to market to the government, and how to establish relationships to do those. Again, this is one of a 5-part series on government contracting set-asides. This was the overview of government set-asides. Please subscribe to the channel to be notified when future videos on this series are updated and uploaded. And again, If you would like to reach out to us for help on anything small business related, government certifications, please reach out to us with any questions or just to connect with us on LinkedIn, Amazon, of course, YouTube by subscribing, Reddit, and you can message us to be subscribed to the monthly newsletter.